Welcome to the Hockey Writers Maple Leafs Lounge, a weekly show from our Toronto Maple Leafs writing crew, bringing you the latest news, rumors, trades, player grades, prospects, and much more. From training camp to the playoffs, from draft day to the trade deadline, our team covers everything that happens with the blue and white. Come on in and pull up a chair. Welcome to the Maple Leafs Lounge.
Hello and welcome back to the Maple Leafs Lounge. I am your host, Peter Baracchini, and as always, I'm joined by my colleague and fellow Maple Leafs writer over at the Hockey Writers, Alex Hobson. Alex, possible clinching scenario for the Toronto Maple Leafs today, or when we're recording, as the Florida Panthers and Ottawa Senators go head-to-head. With the Ottawa Senators win, the Maple Leafs would clinch. Obviously, it's too early to tell what's going on because when we record the result or when this video is up, the results are going to happen. It's currently 1-0 with 6:29 left in the first, but then again, things will change. I'm just going to ask this. First of all, how are you doing? Second of all, are you just going to be in Ottawa Senators for like the next hour and a half, 2 hours?
Yeah, first of all, I'm doing good. MLB The Show 23 came out today, and I just ate a really good stir fry, so it's been a good day so far.
Oh, it sounds like a win.
And yes, I am a diehard Ottawa Senators fan for the next 24 hours or however you want to call it. It'd be nice to get that clinch out of the way, and hopefully the home ice clinch comes soon after that.
Absolutely, and it's good thing to note that the Maple Leafs now are 7 points ahead of the Tampa Bay Lightning, which goes well for everything in terms of clinching scenarios. But at the same time, anything can happen. Jumping into this to start this episode, obviously goaltending is a big thing with the Maple Leafs right now. Matt Murray had a couple of starts lately, has had some highs, has had some lows, but, still looking for some consistency in net. Obviously, with the playoffs coming in, we need to name a starter, and it most likely is going to be Ilya Samsonov. But when the time comes, because, you play games 2 at home, 2 on the road, and then you rotate back and forth. You brought up like a good point. I know we have it at like our group chats and everything like that about possibly Maple Leafs, or even on Twitter, Maple Leafs splitting the goaltenders because they have 2 different records. And I'm just going to read them off quickly right now. Ilya Samsonov is 18-2-2 with a 1.95 goals against average and 929 save percentage at home. On the road, 6-7-1, 3.23 GAA and 892 save percentage. Matt Murray, on the other hand, 5-2-1, 3.37 goals against, 880 save percentage at home, and on the road, 9-6-1, 2.75 goals against, and 915 save percentage. Obviously, 2 different contrasts right there, with one goaltender playing well on the road and one playing well at home. Alex, I know you also came out with an article about the Maple Leafs goaltending situation and how they should approach it for the playoffs. What do they do? Because rotating back and forth with goaltenders in the playoffs has never been ideal, or you want to stick with one person in net. Is this something that could be a possibility going forward?
Absolutely. I think that it's an opportunity for Keefe to try something and be innovative and, maybe take a think outside the box approach that not too many teams have taken in the playoffs. Because typically the way you go is you have your one starting goalie and you just ride them throughout the playoffs, or at least round by round, and take it game by game. But I mean, when you just read off Samsonov and Murray's goaltending splits, and I feel like I wouldn't be putting as much thought into the possibility of this if their splits weren't so lopsided. And that's the main thing right there. Like if it's just, Samsonov's slightly better at home and Murray's slightly better on the road, then no, you're going to just start whoever the better goalie is. But both goalies have a goals against average above 3 and a save percentage under 900, Murray at home and Samsonov on the road. And then Samsonov's home stats are just absurd. Like you just read them off. He's only lost in regulation twice at home all season. Mm-hmm. His goals against average is under 2. And then Matt Murray, while he doesn't have obviously the same type of numbers on the road that Samsonov does at home, his road stats are still a lot better than Samsonov's stats. So I just think that it's something that they got to consider. And I just think that as much as you don't want to be trying things out in the playoffs and experimenting with things for the first time, I mean, the stats all season have said who does better where, right? And I did make a note to mention in my article that I do think that the Leafs should play it by ear. So Samsonov, I think without a doubt deserves the game one start. I think even if he was better on the road, worse at home, he's played well enough all year. I think you just got to give him the start because he's been the more consistent goalie. But factor in how good he is at home. If he comes out flying in those first two games and the Leafs are up 2-0 in the series, I think you'd have to give him a look in game 3 on the road, even though Murray's stats are better. But, if it's something like, Samsonov has a good game in game 1, has an okay, maybe 909, 905 save percentage, and at least lose in game 2. I'm just talking extremely specific hypotheticals here. But if something like that were to happen, they split the series, it would be worth a look to try Murray in game 3, just because what he's capable on the road. And you talk about his 2 cup wins, and as much as you can't really be relying on those cup wins or banking on them to get you through the playoffs, considering they happened 6 and 7 years ago, it has to mean something that he's been there and done it before, right? So you're not talking about just throwing a random guy into the fold.
Yeah, it's something that, like I said before I asked you, it's something that's not rarely heard of, where you rotate your goalies back and forth like you would during the regular season, try to give them some stretches here and there, because you want consistency in that. I feel like kind of like mixing and matching the lineups. If you go back and forth, it's going to create a little bit of uncertainty, confidence, maybe a bit of a factor where one goalie plays well for 2 straight games. Obviously, you go on the road, you don't want to mess with that. And if Samsonov does have 2 strong starts at home, obviously, I agree with you. You should give him the start away. I think the only situation where Murray comes in, and this is the benefactor of having 2 1A, 1B kind of goaltenders, or 2 starters, where you didn't have that kind of luxury last year with Jack Campbell and or Peter Mrazek or Eric Källgren as the backup. If Samsonov does have a bad game and it happens on the road, you at least have Murray to fall back on in that situation, because he has done well. But I do agree that Samsonov is your go-to, and you should try and maintain that consistency, stick with one goalie unless something bad goes, the opposite direction kind of thing. Like we saw where, they went to game 4 and they lost, I believe 7-3 or 7-4 in that game against the Lightning. So that's the only situation where you would probably go to Murray. But yeah, I agree that this is Samsonov's net here on out. But also there have been times where Samsonov, his road numbers may not be or may not justify his overall play, because there have been times where he has played well on the road, has been lights out, but the team has faltered in front of him, aka the New York Islanders game. There are times where he shined against the New Jersey Devils, where Matthews scored that late game winner, and possibly a few other times as well where he looked good on the road. So obviously Samsonov is the guy. Murray is the only one coming in should things go south pretty quickly to stop the bleeding sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. And I said in the article today, the thing about Matt Murray is that he's had the very high highs and very low lows. And you touched on the high highs there. And, I even mentioned as well, like you said, he's had those games where he stands on his head, gets the Leafs 2 points that they had no business getting in the first place. He's made some unbelievable saves. But on the other hand, he's also had games like the one against the Panthers where it looked like watching a Peter Mrazek start from February 2022, where he comes in and just nothing is capable of being saved. So I do think, I'm not going to say, like I said, they shouldn't go into the playoffs with the firm schedule. Like, okay, we're going to start Murray in game 3 and 4, and then Samsonov in 5. But I mean, I think, and I can't imagine I'm the first one to think of this. Like I know people have been talking about their splits all season, but you have to imagine if you're Sheldon Keefe, that's something you've got in the back of your mind, because he likes being innovative, and who knows, that's something that Tampa Bay hasn't seen in the past. So it could work.
Definitely worst case scenario. And I think that has worked for Keefe in the past, where, obviously he needs to make the adjustments in game more often, because I think that was the questionable factor last season in the playoffs. But I think he's learned his lessons and he's going to adjust from here on out. That is definitely for sure.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Moving on to our next topic. Obviously, it was a big, doom and gloom kind of scenario when Ryan O'Reilly went down with the broken finger. Obviously, he had played in a few games with the Leafs, and then all of a sudden we see that injury happen. And it just kind of seemed like, the hockey gods are, against the Maple Leafs once again, because just poor timing. But there is a bright spot on the horizon, as he was spotted Saturday at their morning skate in Carolina when they were playing against the Hurricanes later that evening. And he was taking part in, the morning skates, taking shots, doing some drills, but obviously he still needs to work his way back. But his timeline for return to injury is basically on par with what Keefe said, maybe late March, early April, where he may get in and get 5 or 6 games in. How big of obviously this is going to be a big boost, but how perfectly timing is it that everything has fallen into place for his return, and what this does for the lineup?
I mean, as long as he can get into a good rhythm before the playoffs and maybe find a new home with some, not a new home, but maybe find a home with some consistent line mates, I think that'd be ideal, because I know that before he went down with the injury, the Leafs are playing him on that second line with Tavares and Marner. And I didn't mind that. I thought that was a good line. He obviously scored a hat trick against his old team playing on that line. But I do think that ideally in the playoffs, going up against a team as deep as the Tampa Bay Lightning, I think you want O'Reilly as your third line center. And you stick him alongside, say, Alex Kerfoot and a Sam Lafferty type, something like that. I think that's a very, very dangerous third line. And I don't think that writes off the possibilities of, if the Leafs are down in a game and they need a couple goals late, loading up that second line and putting O'Reilly back up there with Tavares and Marner. Having said that, I do think that either way you look at it, it's a massive boost coming back. Ryan O'Reilly is a former Conn Smythe winner. He was the big deadline addition for the Leafs. I think the fact that he got injured has almost had him flying under the radar a little bit, because now all we've been talking about these past few games are Shen and Jake McCabe and, Lafferty and Gustafsson and them. But Ryan O'Reilly, he's been out for almost a month now, and this is a big name player who's coming back and joining this lineup, and to happen right in time for a playoff run, I think it's perfect timing. So I think it's a massive boost for them, and I think it's something that they absolutely will need going into this Tampa series, no matter how underwhelming the Lightning have looked lately.
And I think it's a good thing you point out that he could go anywhere in the lineup. He could play the second line, third line. He could do it all. And that's the reason why they got him, for that versatility and ability to play him in any situation where, obviously I'm in agreement with you. I did like that him up the middle, and then Tavares on the wing along with Marner. I thought they had something going there. And, it seemed like with Tavares' speed, it kind of complemented that, him on the wing. And then, maybe O'Reilly doesn't have the great foot speed, so maybe that factored in as well. But if you do put him on that third line with a Kerfoot and a Lafferty, and if Kerfoot's, shooting on and firing on all cylinders, like he had that snipe against the Nashville Predators, then maybe you have some serious damage, because then you have a great balance. You have the two-way mindset. You have the speed of Kerfoot, the speed and physical presence of Sam Lafferty. And I know a lot of people are going to talk about how he's kind of been invisible. Yeah, he hasn't produced, but he has still made a factor in other areas, in sort of like in an intangible kind of way with his physicality, presence. I think that's going to be huge for the Maple Leafs going down the line. And if anything, again, it gives Sheldon Keefe options. And this kind of goes into our next point. I think it's the perfect segue for that, where, he's been juggling the lines, forwards, defense. He's been going 11-7, 12-6, moving players around, trying to find that chemistry and getting players more comfortable, and trying to find different, combinations that may work in the playoffs. And obviously he needs to try and find something and stick with it, because we're right now at the end of March going into April. And I think by April, he needs to have his line set, so that way when the time comes, all the players can build that chemistry. Do you think right now Sheldon Keefe is done tinkering and switching everything around with his lines, or do you still think that maybe because with Ryan O'Reilly on the shelf, there may still be a few different combinations or different ideas here and there?
I think there's going to be a few, because I think in the playoffs, unless the Leafs have a situation where they lose a defenseman, and they have to go 11-7 lose a forward, not lose a defenseman. If there's a situation where they have to go 11-7, then you want to be prepared for that, and you want it to be sort of fresh in the players' minds. You don't want it to be something that they're sort of trying on the whim and they only have a day to practice it or something like that. So I say that as someone that hates the 7-11 format, or at least I used to. I've sort of come around to it just because I find that I found that, you know, the chemistry doesn't seem to have been affected as much as maybe people thought it would. But I do think that the tinkering is going to somewhat continue until O'Reilly gets back, because you think about it, I'd imagine the Leafs are going to want to go 12-6 in the playoffs for the most part and not do 11-7 unless they have to. And if they go 12-6, they've got 2 defensemen out of their 8 right now that are probably not going to be playing a lot. And who knows, at this point, that one of those guys could be Timothy Liljegren. It could be Erik Gustafsson. And that, like, who that player is could change depending on how the first few games go. But I think it's important right now for Keefe to get as many looks of those defensemen as possible and keep them as fresh as possible before going into the first round. Because, you know, if you're going to start playing with your playoff pairings, say 3 weeks ago, and you have, say, Liljegren and Gustafsson on the bench, then what are you going to do? Just leave them there and then expect them to come in freezing cold if they have to in the playoffs? So I understand. I don't like the tinkering. I'm kind of over it as well. And I can't imagine the players are loving it too much either, because, you know, you're taking guys who have played with other guys for a long time and then giving them someone else, and they got to adapt. And I know that like, I understand that that's one of those things that could probably screw with the players. I don't know. Mental confidence. Game, maybe a little bit. Confidence. Yeah. Mental game. So I do think that it is going to come back to when O'Reilly comes back, because I think at that point you've got what I believe should be your game one lineup there. And the only change that you can make after that is the possibility for Nyes coming in for Zach Aston Reese or something along the lines of that. So we'll see. I think that they're going to be done tinkering. I've already noticed he's sort of started to slow down with his tinkering. Like Jarn Krok has been on the top line for a couple games now.
Yes.
They've been trying doing 12-6 more often. So I think it's probably close to being a thing of the past, but I just hope that it doesn't continue beyond when Riley gets back. O'Reilly, I should say.
And it's a good thing you brought up Matthew Nyes, because he is heading to the Frozen Four. So that just means April 6th is probably the earliest now that he could probably sign his contract with the Maple Leafs. And obviously we wish him the best of luck. Want him to perform well, want him to play in that big moment. And that will probably help when he comes over, playing in the collegiate championship, playing in the playoffs, high stakes. You know, he may be thriving on that, and he's going to want to perform at his best. So we'll see what happens. But I do agree. I think the defense is more a bit of a concern, because he's constantly finding the right pair. And it just seems a little bit not concerning, but I don't know why he just doesn't go back to, I mean, I would say he should go back to Riley and Brody, but the way that you see McCabe and Brody play, they're an effective, you know, stalwart defensive two-way shutdown kind of tandem, and you're seeing the benefits of that payoff. So do you put Riley with a Luke Shen? Obviously, we've seen him play with Liljegren. Some, you know, hiccups here and there for both players. Obviously, I think with certain players, he needs to find a pairing or a combination and fast, so that way they could find that rhythm and groove. I think that's going to be more important, especially in Riley's case, when, you know, he's a $7.5 million defenseman and you see him kind of being played on like the third pairing, but, you know, minutes are going to change no matter what. So we'll see what happens. I do think that at some point it does need to stop. And I think he needs to settle in, write it down. These are the lines going forward. Play at your best.
I couldn't agree more. I think that as much as we hate tinkering, I think it also is good to keep the level of competition high. Mm-hmm. And, you know, as much as I was on the train of trading Hall at the deadline and giving Liljegren his proper opportunity, Liljegren's played some bad hockey this past week. And I think right now we're looking at a situation where potentially, do you really trust him in the top 4 against Tampa Bay, or trust him not to make those late game giveaways? So I think he'll still get into a game here and there, but these past couple weeks have shown that the situation is definitely more dicey than it is. So the competition is good.
Absolutely. And if Justin Hall is making those big time hits like we saw against Nashville, I think that's going to be very key, because we've seen how, you know, he lacks that physicality considering the size that he has. But We'll see. And before we get into Timothy Liljegren, again, perfect segue. This episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Hockeypedia. Have you ever been looking for details on a team's player list? Do you want to know the Maple Leafs Stanley Cup history? Yeah, just put the 1967 jokes in there. We get it. Who is in the 2015 Stanley Cup playoffs? What are the NHL awards and what's their history? If you're interested in these or any other hockey questions, make sure you check out and bookmark the Hockey Writers Hockeypedia page, an ever-growing collection of hockey resources that is invaluable to any fan looking for information. Look for a link in the show description and dive in today. As we made that transition where we were talking about lines in Timothy Liljegren, we're going to get into that. Obviously, you and I are both big fans of him, considering how he's still very young. The way that he came in last season, it looked like he was battling for that top 4 spot. He still looked great with Rasmus Sandin, but then he got traded. He still kind of looked great even after the fact. But now we're starting to see the struggles kick in. And the biggest one was that one against the New York Islanders where still, a 1-1 game, he cost the puck up on a simple clearing attempt. And we know Liljegren's ability to break out passes or to execute on breakout passes and exit the zone, not necessarily flawlessly, but it's a strength to his game. And he does that very well. We're not seeing that right now because we were talking about the lineups before. Is this a situation where maybe mentally Liljegren is kind of on edge because he was in that, third pairing solidified spot, moving into the top 4 every now and then. And now with these new additions, is the competition getting to him where maybe, he's lacking the confidence and he's struggling and the mistakes are mounting because of that?
I think that could definitely be the case. And I will say, I hope that it's not a case where his morale is going to be affected by it, because if I'm Keefe and Dubas, I'm looking at Liljegren and saying, look, how high the stakes are for the playoffs this year. Mm-hmm. We think you're a great player. You are our future, but right now we need to put the best lineup out there, the most experienced lineup, and the lineup that we can trust the most to play a tight game and get us out of this first round. And Liljegren, like I said, is the future of one of the future pieces of this defensive core. Justin Holl, I can't imagine, is for as many times as we've tried to say, just no way they keep Holl this deadline. No way they keep him now. No way they don't leave him exposed for the Kraken. For as many times as we've said that Holl is not going anywhere, I really can't imagine they re-sign him, because they've got Liljegren and Connor Timmins on the right side. And both of those guys, I think, could benefit from some increased ice time this year. So I really hope that it's not a morale thing for Liljegren, but I can definitely see the possibility of him just, maybe being thrown off his game a little bit because of the amount of new additions. And you can't really fault the guy for that. I mean, he's young. He's my age, so I know he's young. And it's something that I think every young defenseman goes through. So I think that's definitely part of it. I just hope that it's not something that's going to mess with his morale to the point where, he's in a situation similar to what Sandin was in.
Absolutely. And let's not forget Topi Niemela. Obviously, he's he's years away. Maybe let's play safe and maybe say 2, 3, max 4 years away from making this team. But then again, his experience in the senior level could vault him ahead and move him up the depth chart and possibly fight for a spot earlier. So obviously you don't want to keep Holl in because you have Liljegren and Niemela and Timmins as possible pieces for the future. But I do think that, it has affected his play overall. And I think you notice when he started to struggle and when the mistakes started mounting. And obviously, I'm still a firm believer that he has the mindset and mentality to get back into the swing of things and get back on track like he's shown to play. But obviously this could just be a bump in the road, but he needs to figure it out, because if he wants to make that impact and we've seen him play. I mean, we've even seen that physical side of him where he's not afraid to get involved and lay the body. And I think we talk about the combinations. I think if he goes back to, being paired up with someone like Mark Giordano, who he's more comfortable with and he spent a lot of time with in the past, especially last season after he was acquired at the deadline, if you have that, familiarity with someone that and a veteran, that Giordano can help him out and help him through the ropes, because I guess we could call him a veteran, right? I guess so.
Giordano?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. He is the textbook definition of a veteran. He's like the Jason Spence of the defensive corps.
Exactly. And if anyone's actually taking me seriously, we should call him a veteran. I'm joking, but
you never know, man.
You never know.
There are so many people who wouldn't know sarcasm if it slapped them across the face.
Yeah.
So
Again,
felt like it was important to get it out there.
Yes, exactly. So if he goes back to someone he's familiar with in that as a third pairing role, it could do a lot of wonders for him because he has the confidence, and Giordano's spoken highly of him previously before. So I think maybe if Keefe is looking for him to try and get the most out of him and get him going, go back to that pairing because it worked very well in the past.
Yeah, I agree with that. And Gio's under contract for one more year, so who knows? Maybe that's your bottom pairing for next year, or your second pairing, even depending on how much Gio's legs can handle. But I think that that's going to be a big thing for him. And, you know, like you said, this ties back to the whole lineup shuffling thing. Liljegren going from playing with Gio pretty consistently to going to play, and Sandin, like you said, to playing with what seems like a different partner every night for him. I can see why that would be a bit of an issue for him. So hopefully that changes next year. I just hope that he kind of sees where management's coming from right around now.
Absolutely. And as we transition from the defense to the forwards, let's talk about Auston Matthews, because I think right now this is the perfect time with him, you know, being on a heater, getting hot at the right when he should. And the stats are showing right now. In his last 6 games, he has goals in 5 of the last 6, 10 points in that span, and back-to-back 2-goal performances against the Carolina Hurricanes and Florida Panthers. And to make things even better, a lot of people were questioning his goal scoring abilities. He's still in the top. He's now in the top 15 in scoring right now. He's tied with Clayton Keller and Adrian Kempe, 1 behind Mika Zibanejad, 2 behind Mark Scheifele, and 3 behind Kirill Kaprizov. So he's 3 to 4 goals from cracking the top 10 right now. Obviously, you know, there was concerns. He did say that he was dealing with something, with a bit of an injury. And now the fact that he's on his game, he's hot at the right moment. Is this a great sign for him, especially heading into the playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think that Leaf fans getting to watch a player score 60 goals for their team after years and years of watching bona fide top line centers. No offense, Tyler Bozak. But I think that Leaf fans honestly kind of got greedy after that and figured this is something that we're going to be seeing every single year from now on. And we might see it again. Who knows? But it says a lot that there were concerns and legitimate media talking points that this guy might, you know, he's not himself. Something's wrong with him. Is he the same player as last year, et cetera, for a guy that was scoring 30 goals and over a point per game. I mean, that's like most teams would dream to have that for their top line center. So I think it's a great sign, if anything, that he says that was attributed to an injury, because now that he's healthy, or at least he says he's healthy, you see how well he's doing. And I've maintained all year that I don't care what Matthews does in the regular season. If he turns it on in the playoffs, none of it will matter. You know, sit back and ask yourself, would you rather him have a 60-goal season and a first-round exit, or a 40-goal season and a long playoff run where he contributes in every round? Right. So I think it's huge for them. I think it's big that their best player is looking like himself again. And, you know, the fact that he can only get better from what he's been this year, I think is it's something working in their favor.
It boggles my mind that a on pace 40 goal season and on pace 80 point season is a down year for Auston Matthews. And that really is telling. But like you said, he's doing a lot more. Like, obviously the points matter, but at the same time for him, it doesn't, because he's excelling in every single area. He leads all forwards in the NHL with 84 blocked shots. Think about that for a second. A former 60 goal scorer or consistent 40 goal scorer getting into the lanes, blocking shots, and doing whatever it takes to win. That is absolutely huge. And like you said, I think what matters most is going to be in the playoffs. And if he's able to find that production like he did last season with 4 goals and 9 points in 7 games, that is going to be very telling, because everyone is going to say, oh, can this core get it done? Can Matthews get it done? Well, we saw him get it done last season or last year in the playoffs. It's just, it came down to, you know, Vasilevsky being Vasilevsky and 1 goal being the difference maker. And it's not for a lack of him not getting his chances, because he had 29 shots on net. That was still very good, but at the same time, you'd like to see a little bit more. But he was making an impact no matter what. So I think with that that well-rounded game coming into effect, the fact that his shot is on point right now, I think Matthews is going to be at his very best this time around in the postseason. That is definitely for sure.
I agree, sir.
And as we like to end it off from time to time, we're going to end the show off with a quick fire question. And obviously, we saw how well Joseph Woll played at certain points of the season, but that game against the Nashville Predators, I thought that is very telling of where he is with his development and the season that he's having with the Toronto Marlies. Alex, let's put on your GM cap for a second right now. Are you going to make a move to trade Matt Murray in the offseason in hopes that Joseph Woll is going to be your backup based on what you've seen from very, very limited sample in the NHL, but just the consistency he's had in the AHL to get these call-ups and these opportunities?
Yes, I would. And I think I'll say I would, assuming the Leafs can bring back Samsonov on a multi-year deal and Woll's ready to take that next step, because at this point he's, and the Leafs sort of had an issue with this. I'm hoping they learned their lesson after doing that with Garrett Sparks and Curtis McElhinney back in 2018. That didn't work out well for them, but Woll has just overall looked a lot more comfortable in the games than Garrett Sparks ever did. So the way that he's looked in the limited couple games that he's played this year and even last year, I think that he's more than ready to make that next step and be a backup goalie next year. And for Matt Murray, I like the guy. I think he's truthfully been fine. I think he's been a fine backup goalie, contract aside. But you got to remember that if you're bringing Woll up, there's also just the benefit of losing Matt Murray's money. And $4 million is a lot of money that could be spent elsewhere. So I'd be okay with it. I think that Murray's been fine this year. I don't think he deserved half the scrutiny that he got this past offseason. But when you've got Woll knocking on the door right there, if you can bring back Samsonov, who's younger and has a good career ahead of him, I think that that's probably the right way to go.
And that $4 million, the Maple Leafs have a lot of free agents heading into next season. So if players continue to perform like let's say Noel Chari, let's say Michael Bunting, you have that extra space to allocate to players who played a pivotal role, depending on how far you go or how well you do in the playoffs. But yeah, obviously 8 games is a very, very small sample. It truly is. But the fact that he's been very consistent in those games, I think last year was, more of him adjusting to the NHL level. He was a little bit shaky, but you're seeing a little bit more composure and poise in the crease. He's not as jumpy. He's not overshooting his positioning. He's more dialed in and focused. And I think having a 6-2 record, 239 goals against average, a 922 save percentage, I think that is very, very telling. Obviously, we're not expecting him to become a full-fledged or full-on starter right now, but considering where he was at with his career, dealing with a lot of injuries, he's had a lot of promise, and he was a top goaltending prospect for the team in the system. Now that he's healthy, now that he's getting these starts, now that he's showing that consistency, I think you have to try and consider that and say, hey, we got to have this youth movement right now. And if Samsonov is your go-to guy, and obviously Samsonov has been consistent, but if he struggles for like a game or two, you have someone that you could rely on in Joseph Woll going back in there. And like you said, it's not that Matt Murray has been bad. It's just that you need just one pivotal save or one goal to keep out of that net. And I think Matt Murray has done well in that, but has shown some, concerns with that as well.
It's not a risk you want for the $4 million either for one more year.
Absolutely. And again, we love Matt Murray. We're glad that he's having this kind of bounce back season and gaining some confidence. But at this point as well, you have to think about the future. And Joseph Woll is proving his worth and showing that to the Maple Leafs that he does belong in the league. Well, that is all the time that we have for this episode. Thank you again for tuning in. Be sure to check out Hockeypedia. There's going to be a link in the show description below. Check that out and dive in today. Once again, that's it for this episode. For Alex Hobson, I'm Peter Baracchini, and we'll see you next time on the Maple Leafs Lounge.